Specialist Claire Donovan never forgot the first time she heard the joke. It was during basic, on a muggy Georgia afternoon, when sweat clung to uniforms like glue. Drill sergeants barked, privates stumbled, rifles clattered, and someone in the back had muttered it under his breath. Medics don't fight. The line had spread like wildfire. Every time she passed an infantry platoon, someone found a way to say it, sometimes with a grin, sometimes with a smirk, but always with that dismissive edge. Medics don't fight. Medics patch us up. Medics stay behind while real soldiers pull triggers. Claire learned to laugh it off, keeping her face composed even when her chest burned with frustration. She had enlisted to save lives, yes, but not to be belittled. Her uniform was the same as theirs. Her boots blistered the same, and her blood would bleed just as red if war demanded it. Yet somehow she was considered less. She carried the insult like a pebble in her boot, annoying, constant, and impossible to ignore. By the time her unit deployed to Iraq in 2006, the joke had become a ritual. Convoys lined up under the brutal desert sun, vehicles rumbling like steel beasts, and always someone would lean from a Humvee and shout, "Hey Doc, don't forget your Band-Aids." The laughter followed her like a shadow. But what they didn't know was that Claire had prepared. In the quiet hours after duty, when the desert cooled and stars spread like spilled salt across the night sky, she practiced. Alone, in the motor pool or the shadowed corners of camp, she shouldered her rifle. She checked her stance, her breathing, her trigger squeeze. She ran through drills she wasn't expected to master. She memorized the weight of magazines, the rattle of rounds, the feel of cold steel in her hands. She knew she wasn't supposed to fight. She knew the Geneva Convention branded her as non-combatant, healer first, protector of the wounded. But the war outside the wire didn't care about conventions. Insurgents didn't pause and say, "Let's not shoot the medic." Claire had seen too many reports of medics dying with aid bags unopened. She refused to be one of them. The convoy rolled out from forward operating base Marez before dawn, when the desert sky was still a pale gray canvas waiting for fire. Dust billowed behind the trucks, clinging to every seam of gear and uniform. The soldiers rode half alert, half exhausted, banter crackling through radios to keep the nerves down. Claire sat in the back of a Humvee, knees pressed against her aid bag. The bag weighed nearly as much as a man's kit, stuffed with bandages, IVs, tourniquets, morphine, and hope. It was her weapon, her shield, her responsibility. Around her, the squad passed energy drinks, joked about home, and teased each other about girlfriends and bad haircuts. Their laughter was forced, but it filled the silence. "Hey, Doc," Sergeant Mills leaned back from the turret, grinning. "What's in the magic bag today? Got a cure for boredom?" Claire smirked. "Just the usual gauze, tape, and something to knock you out when your jokes get unbearable." The squad chuckled. Mills threw her a thumbs up. It was moments like this, the warmth of banter, that reminded her why she loved them, even when they teased. They didn't mean harm, not really. Soldiers survived by laughing, by poking fun at everything, by keeping fear at bay. She just wished the respect came easier. Still, Claire carried her pride quietly. She had chosen this path. When she looked at her patch caduceus, stitched in muted thread, it meant something deeper than combat. It meant she would fight death itself, not just the men who carried rifles. But sometimes, in the silence between laughs, she wondered, would they ever see her as more? The convoy pushed deeper into Mosul, streets unfurled like scars, buildings pockmarked with bullet holes, windows shattered, alleys dark with secrets. Children sometimes waved as vehicles passed, but today the streets were empty. Too empty. Claire felt the unease ripple through the squad. Jokes died on lips. Fingers tightened on triggers. Eyes scanned rooftops and windows, searching for movement. She swallowed, feeling her heartbeat quicken. She had seen this before silence, before chaos. Her hand drifted to the rifle slung across her chest. She wasn't supposed to need it, but she touched it anyway, a reminder she was ready. In those moments of quiet tension, her mind flickered back to home. She remembered standing in her parents' driveway before leaving for deployment, her mother's eyes wet, her father trying to mask worry with pride. "Take care of yourself," her mother had whispered. "Promise me." Claire had promised. But she had also known her job was to take care of everyone else first. Her brother, a Marine already scarred by Fallujah, had clapped her shoulder. "It's different over there," he'd said. "You'll learn fast. Don't let them think you're soft, Claire. They'll test you. They always do." And they had. Every day since arriving. Now, rolling through the ghost streets of Mosul, Claire clenched her jaw. She wasn't soft. She was ready. Her eyes scanned rooftops, windows, alleys. She memorized angles, shadows, possible firing points. Each heartbeat thudded like a countdown. The kind soldiers feel before chaos. Inside the Humvee, the squad sat in silence, alert but pretending not to be afraid. Claire gripped her aid bag tighter. The pebble in her boot, the joke, the dismissal, the constant reminder that she wasn't real felt sharper than ever. Medics don't fight, they said. But Claire Donovan knew one day she might have to. The sun climbed higher, casting a harsh glare over Mosul's battered streets, turning concrete and dust into blinding white. Convoys moved cautiously, engines growling through alleyways and ruined intersections. Claire Donovan sat in the back of her Humvee, eyes sweeping every window ledge, rooftop, and shattered doorway. The laughter from earlier was gone. In its place lingered a tense awareness, a pulse of dread that made her fingertips twitch over her aid bag. "Stay alert," Lieutenant Harrow's voice crackled over the radio. Eyes sharp. "We've got reports of insurgent activity ahead." Claire nodded silently. Her stomach tightened. She had memorized this stretch of the city during briefings, but nothing could truly prepare anyone for it. Mosul was alive in its own way, haunted, dangerous, and unpredictable. Shadows seemed to slither along walls, and the wind carried strange scents, burnt metal, dust, and something faintly acrid, like gunpowder. Private Jenkins, riding shotgun, leaned back casually against his seat. Another quiet day in paradise. "Huh, Doc?" he joked, trying to mask the tension. Claire forced a smile. "Yeah, paradise with broken windows and IEDs." The convoy rolled on, tires crunching over debris-strewn streets. Soldiers kept scanning, rifles at the ready, though the calm exterior of the city lulled newcomers into a false sense of security. Claire, however, could feel it. The calm was never real. Every alley she passed whispered the memory of ambushes. Past, every rooftop hinted at danger. Her eyes flicked to the Humvee beside her. Sergeant Mills kept his turret locked forward, his jaw tight. He wasn't joking now. Even he had learned that laughter could get a soldier killed. Claire adjusted the strap of her aid bag. The weight was comforting, grounding. She had spent months training for moments like this, but training could only prepare her so much. The battlefield was chaotic, unpredictable, and brutal. A child's distant scream pierced the air. Instinctively, Claire's hand went to her bag, not for medicine yet. She listened, hearing the faint shuffle of boots, the metallic clatter of something falling in an alley. She tensed, heart accelerating. Lieutenant Harrow's voice broke through. "Check your sectors." Eyes sharp, the convoy slowed. Dust swirled in the hot wind, curling in the sunlight like smoke. The Humvees moved cautiously, one after another, a steel line of metal and purpose. Claire's pulse drummed in her ears. Every shadow could conceal a rifle. Every corner might hold death. Private Sanchez muttered something under his breath, trying to shake off the tension. Claire didn't catch the words, but she felt the fear underneath. It was raw, instinctive, and familiar. She had trained for this, but nothing prepared anyone for the reality. Men dying in inches, screams echoing, smoke curling into the sky. Her eyes flicked to the Humvee ahead. The driver's hands were white-knuckled on the wheel. The soldiers were focused, but the cracks of tension showed everywhere in the twitch of an eye, the sudden jolt of a shoulder. Claire scanned the rooftops. She had been trained to recognize signs, disturbed debris, shadows that moved independently, irregular patterns in the streets. Her gaze lingered on a half-collapsed building to the left, windows shattered, doors ajar. Something about it didn't sit right. She leaned forward, squinting through the glare. Her gut told her to prepare, to get ready, though nothing had happened yet. She checked her medkit. Tourniquets? Check. Morphine? Check. Bandages? Check. Every item she needed was in place, but her hands itched for more, the tools that could protect lives immediately. Her rifle. She hadn't been issued combat yet in this convoy, but she had spent nights in secret training, memorizing every aspect of the weapon, feeling the steel against her hands, imagining scenarios she hoped would never come. The convoy moved past. The building, tires rattling over loose rubble. For a moment, silence reclaimed the streets, broken only by the wind and the distant hum of engines. Claire allowed herself a slow breath. Too quiet, she thought. Far too quiet. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden crackle of gunfire, a single sharp pop that made her chest tighten. Reflexes kicked in. She ducked slightly, gripping her. Bag. Shouts erupted from the Humvee ahead. Contact. Contact front. Chaos hit like a wave. Dust and smoke erupted from a nearby alley as tracer rounds illuminated the air. Soldiers dove for cover, scrambling, shouting commands. Claire's heart pounded, adrenaline burning in her veins. The IEDs she had feared had not yet detonated, but the firefight had begun. "Doc, we need you up front," someone shouted. Claire's training surged forward. She moved, crawling across the Humvee floor, keeping low. Her hands worked automatically, adjusting bandages on soldiers already wounded by the initial burst of gunfire. But she knew she had to do more. Every second counted. She scanned the street. Insurgents emerged from shadows, firing from windows, doorways, and broken walls. The sounds were deafening. Gunfire, screams, shouts, the metallic clatter of rounds hitting metal. Dust choked the air. The city seemed to close in on them, buildings towering like silent sentinels, watching. Claire realized, in that instant, that the joke, medics don't fight, was over. The battlefield didn't care who you were. It only cared who survived. Her hands shook as she reached for a fallen rifle, dusty and abandoned, but her mind was calm, focused. She had trained for this, in silence, in secret. Now the time had come. She braced the weapon against her shoulder, aiming at the nearest. Insurgent. Her first shot rang out, surprising even her. The enemy reeled back, and the squad noticed. "Doc's shooting." Someone shouted through the chaos, a mix of shock and disbelief. Claire moved again, alternating between patching wounds and firing. She had never felt more alive, more terrified, more responsible. Every shot she fired protected someone. Every bandage she wrapped preserved a life. She wasn't just a medic anymore. She was a shield, a barrier between her squad and death. The firefight intensified. Claire dragged a corporal to cover, his leg bleeding from a bullet wound. She pressed the tourniquet tightly and rolled him behind a Humvee. Her fingers were slick with blood, some his, some hers from scrapes, but she didn't hesitate. Another insurgent emerged from an alleyway. Reflexively, Claire aimed and fired. Her training held her breathing steady. Sergeant Mills barked orders, and the squad moved as one, covering Claire's actions. For the first time, they didn't mock her. They followed her lead, the sound of gunfire mixed with screams, wind, and dust. Claire's world narrowed to a tunnel of survival. Wounded soldiers, enemies in sight, the rifle in her hands, the medkit. At her side, every heartbeat counted. Every second could be the last. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the firing ceased. Silence. Eerie, suffocating silence. Claire sank against the Humvee, chest heaving, adrenaline fading. Around her, the squad stared, wide-eyed, bloodied, alive. Her hands shook as she cleaned the rifle, then reached for bandages. She realized, in that moment, the truth of war. Medics didn't just heal. Sometimes they had to fight. Medics don't fight? The words rang hollow now. She had fought, and she had survived. And more importantly, she had saved lives. The convoy regrouped. Engines hummed as vehicles repositioned. Soldiers murmured in disbelief, glancing at Claire with a newfound respect. No one joked about bandages or medics anymore. Her role had changed in the eyes of the squad. She was no longer just a patcher of wounds. She was a protector. Claire, meanwhile, sat quietly, catching her breath, checking supplies, and counting the wounded. Her heart still raced, but she forced herself to focus. She had a job to do, and the ambush had only just begun to teach her the stakes. Mosul's streets were still dangerous, unpredictable, and Claire Donovan had learned that survival demanded more than courage. It demanded adaptation, instinct, and a willingness to cross lines that had once seemed sacred. Medics don't fight. They had laughed. Now they would never forget. The air hung thick with dust and smoke, clinging to uniforms, dripping down the soldiers' necks and stinging their eyes. Claire Donovan crouched behind the rear Humvee, pulse hammering, ears ringing from the sudden eruptions of gunfire. Every corner, every shadow felt alive with danger. The city's skeletal buildings loomed over them like silent predators, concealing rifles, grenades, and death itself. "Medic!" Sergeant Mills shouted, dragging a bleeding private behind cover. The boy's leg had been torn apart by shrapnel, blood pooling fast, soaking through camouflage. Claire lunged forward, gripping her aid bag, and pressed her hands over the wound. Her fingers moved with precision, wrapping tourniquets and pulling the gauze tight enough to stop the bleeding, but not so tight as to cut circulation. The Humvee beside her erupted with a burst of gunfire. Tracer rounds sliced through the dust-heavy air, embedding themselves in concrete and steel. Another soldier screamed from a nearby street. He had been hit in the shoulder. Claire tore toward him, firing a few quick warning shots as she moved. Her rifle felt like an extension of herself, natural and precise despite the chaos. Somewhere behind the smoke, a grenade rolled across the cracked pavement. Claire dove on top of it instinctively, covering the soldier she was dragging. The explosion was deafening, but she shielded him enough to avoid fatal injuries. Shrapnel nicked her arms and face, tearing through fabric and skin. Pain flared, but adrenaline burned hotter, dulling it almost immediately. Her mind functioned with automatic precision. One hand applied pressure to wounds, secured tourniquets, and checked vitals, while the other gripped the rifle, scanning rooftops and alleys for movement. Each step was measured, calculated, each breath counted. She had trained for moments like this, but training never fully replicated the terror, the chaos, the screams, the unpredictable flight of bullets through sunlit streets. "Doc, we're pinned," a corporal shouted. Claire's eyes darted across the street. The enemy had anticipated their path, converging from multiple angles. Snipers had taken positions on broken rooftops. Gunmen crouched in doorways and behind. Debris, moving with lethal precision. Every escape route was covered. The squad could not advance. Retreat was impossible. Survival demanded courage, quick thinking, and firepower. Her first instinct was medicine, but now medicine alone would not save them. She had to fight, and so she did. Claire raised her rifle, aiming at a shadow moving across a rooftop. The kick of the weapon jarred her shoulder, but her fingers held steady. She squeezed the trigger, hearing the snap of the round impact, then another, then another. The insurgent slumped, and Claire ducked low again, scanning for more threats. Docks. Shooting. Someone yelled amid the chaos. Claire ignored it, focusing only on survival. The wounded around her cried out, some in agony, some in terror, all relying on her. She moved rapidly between them, dragging soldiers behind cover, applying bandages, administering morphine. A blend of healer and fighter became instinctive, a duality she had prepared for in countless solitary hours. Each action fueled the next. Fire to protect, hands to save. The alley ahead erupted. A soldier was down, pinned by automatic fire. Claire didn't hesitate. She fired several rounds in suppression, keeping the enemy's heads down long enough to drag him to relative safety. Her arms burned, her lungs screamed for air, but she did not stop. The lives around her depended on it. Somewhere behind her, another explosion rocked the street. Dust and debris rained down. Claire pressed herself against the Humvee's side, checking her squad. Several men were bleeding heavily, some screaming, some silently trembling in shock. The mortar fire had thrown everything into chaos. She tightened bandages, administered morphine, and gave quick instructions to stabilize them until they could move. The enemy had not relented. Insurgents advanced through alleys, firing from windows, moving between broken buildings. Claire's squad was outnumbered, pinned, and slowly being ground down by relentless fire. She realized survival meant making split-second decisions: who to save first, when to fire, when to pull back. Each choice carried weight heavier than the desert sun overhead. Private Jenkins had taken a graze across his arm. Claire applied pressure, ignoring the sting of her own shrapnel wounds. "Hold still," she said, voice firm. "You're going to be fine." But deep down, she knew that fine was fragile as a thread over a chasm of gunfire. Claire's training was no longer theoretical. She was in the crucible of war. Each shot she fired bought seconds. Each bandage she applied preserved life. She had crossed the line her peers had laughed at, embodying both roles, a medic and a combatant. Another insurgent appeared, sprinting across an open stretch of street, rifle raised. Claire steadied her breathing. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but her hands were calm. She fired, the recoil rocking her shoulder, and the insurgent fell. Dust clouded the air as rounds whined past her ears. Somewhere in the middle of chaos, she realized that the squad had stopped laughing at her. They had begun to follow her lead, trusting her instinct and courage. The irony was sharp. The medic who was once the butt of jokes had become the one. Holding their lives together, minutes passed like hours. Sweat and blood mixed on Claire's face, streaking her camouflage with the chaos of the battlefield. She had fired more rounds than she could count. She had dragged more wounded than she had hoped she would. She had felt fear, real and blinding, but had pushed through. Her hands were shaking now, but she refused to stop. Every second mattered. She moved quickly between Humvees, checking the wounded, giving morphine, changing bandages, pulling men out of the line of fire. Her rifle never wavered, never idle, always poised. A corporal whispered behind her, voice trembling. I didn't know medics could fight like this." Claire gave a tight, grim smile. There was no time for pride. Only survival. The enemy was relentless. Each alley seemed alive with movement. Another blast shook the street, throwing Claire and a nearby private into the dust. She scrambled up, hands already working on a severe wound in his leg, all while returning fire with her rifle. Pain screamed through her arms from the shrapnel, but she ignored it. Her mind was a storm of focus. Fire, heal, cover, repeat. She realized then that she had become something her peers never imagined. Not just a medic, not just a soldier, but a force bridging life and death. Every bandage she wrapped and every enemy she stopped brought another heartbeat. The squad's survival rested on her dual mastery of medicine and weaponry. Hours or maybe minutes, it was impossible to tell, passed in a haze of gunfire, smoke, and shouting. Claire's vision blurred, sweat and dust stinging her eyes. She glanced around. Several soldiers were still down, but none were dead. They were all breathing, all clinging to life. Somewhere deep inside her, Claire felt a strange calm. The initial fear had been replaced by instinct. She was no longer the medic who didn't fight. She was a protector, the soldier who carried life in one hand and fire in the other. Finally, the enemy withdrew. The streets fell silent, broken only by groans of the wounded and the distant hum of engines. Claire sank against a Humvee, exhausted, shaking, but alive. Around her, the squad looked at her with wide eyes, reverence mingled with shock. No one made jokes, no one laughed. She cleaned her rifle, wiped dust and blood from her uniform, and checked on every soldier. Each life she had saved was a victory. Each breath preserved a testament to her training, courage, and determination. For the first time, the pebble in her boot, the ridicule, the dismissal, the constant reminder that medics don't fight, felt heavy no longer. Claire Donovan had crossed that line, and she had survived. The squad now saw her differently. The medic they had laughed at had become the shield they had relied upon. And though she didn't seek praise, she understood something essential. Sometimes, saving lives demanded picking up a weapon, standing in the line of fire, and becoming the person no one expected. Mosul's streets were still dangerous. The war was far from over. But in this moment, Claire Donovan had proven that medics could fight, and the battlefield would remember. The air was thick with smoke, acrid and suffocating, curling around the Humvees and clinging to soldiers' sweat-soaked uniforms. Claire Donovan's chest heaved, lungs burning as the distant echoes of gunfire still pulsed through the streets. Her fingers were raw from dragging wounded men behind cover, applying pressure to torn flesh, and gripping the rifle that had become an extension of her body. She crouched behind the steel hull of the rear Humvee, scanning rooftops and alleyways. Eyes sharp, heart hammering, the enemy had not given up. They were regrouping, using debris as cover, preparing to strike again. Claire could hear their whispers, a shifting of metal, the sharp clicks of rifles being readied. "Move him back," she shouted to a nearby corporal, hauling the bleeding private from the middle of the street to a safer spot behind cover. The soldier's leg was mangled, bone jutting unnaturally. Claire applied the tourniquet with practiced precision, wrapping the blood-soaked bandage tight. His breathing was shallow, but he was alive. Behind her, tracer rounds ripped through the air, striking walls, vehicles, and dust clouds, sending fragments into the street like deadly fireworks. Claire felt the vibrations through her boots and shivered, adrenaline sharpening her senses. Each movement, each decision, had to be flawless. One slip could cost a life. She raised her rifle, peering over the Humvee's edge. Another insurgent moved along a rooftop, rifle leveled at her squad. Without hesitation, Claire fired, the recoil biting into her shoulder. The enemy crumpled, but more emerged from a side alley. Bullets ricocheted off the pavement and walls, sending shards of concrete flying. Suppressive fire. She yelled, firing in bursts to keep the attackers' heads down. Then, shifting, she sprinted across the street, dragging a wounded private who had collapsed mid-crossing. The dust choked her lungs, but she pushed on, adrenaline overriding pain and fear. She ducked behind a concrete barricade, switching seamlessly between medic and fighter, adrenaline driving every action. Corporal Mills barked orders, coordinating the squad, but they relied heavily on her instincts. "Cover that window," he shouted. Claire returned fire, steady, precise, keeping the insurgents pinned long enough for Mills to reposition soldiers. A grenade landed near their position, bouncing along the cracked street. Without thinking, Claire dove onto it, shielding a private behind her. The explosion was deafening, a violent shockwave that rattled her bones and shredded nearby debris. Pain lanced through her arms and legs, minor shrapnel embedding in her skin, but she ignored it. The wounded she protected remained intact. That was all that mattered. She rolled from cover to cover, administering morphine to a soldier whose arm was shattered, applying bandages to another with a chest wound, all while returning fire at the advancing enemy. Each action was instinctual, practiced, and precise. She was no longer just a medic. She was the line holding back death. Her mind functioned with tunnel focus. Fire, heal, cover, repeat. Every heartbeat mattered. Every breath counted. She had trained for moments like this, but the real battlefield demanded more than drills. It demanded adaptation, courage, and a readiness to cross lines no one expected. Another insurgent appeared from a narrow alley, rifle raised and eyes wide. Claire fired, dropping him instantly, then immediately shifted her attention to a soldier screaming from behind cover. Blood coated his uniform. A shrapnel wound tore through his thigh. Claire lunged forward, gripping his arm and dragging him into the relative safety of a Humvee. Her hands moved with precision, wrapping a tourniquet and applying pressure. From her peripheral vision, she saw another enemy attempting to flank them. Claire spun, rifle ready, and fired a series of sharp, controlled shots. The insurgent went down. Dust swirled around her, her face streaked with blood, sweat, and grime. But her mind was calm, focused, efficient. "Doc," someone shouted, "you saved my life." Claire didn't pause to respond. Lives were still in danger, and she had no time for praise. She moved from soldier to soldier, stabilizing wounds, securing cover, and maintaining her defense. Line, the firefight raged. Smoke and dust made it nearly impossible to see, but Claire's instincts guided her. She spotted an insurgent sneaking between debris, aimed, and fired. Another collapsed. She crouched, breath ragged, then dashed across the open street to help a soldier pinned against a Humvee. The enemy opened fire again. She fired warning shots, ducked behind a concrete barrier, then slid to her knees to check vitals. Her arms were trembling from exhaustion, her muscles screaming, but adrenaline kept her moving. Every soldier she saved, every enemy she neutralized, was a life preserved. She was the shield between her squad and death itself. Minutes stretched like hours. Claire moved continuously, dragging wounded, applying first aid, firing her rifle, and shouting instructions. Each time she fired, she calculated trajectory, recoil, and enemy position. Each time she applied a bandage, she monitored vitals and ensured the soldier could still fight or move. The duality of her role was exhausting, but it was necessary. She was a bridge between life and death, and she refused to falter. Somewhere in the chaos, she realized that her squad no longer questioned her. They were following her lead, trusting her judgment, relying on her instincts. The medic who had once been mocked now dictated their survival. Private Sanchez whispered, voice shaking, I didn't know you could do this." Claire gave a brief nod. No words needed. There was no time for humility, only action. Another explosion rocked the street, throwing debris into the air. Claire was thrown to the ground, but immediately rolled behind cover. She quickly assessed the nearby soldiers. Everyone was alive, though some were wounded. She sprinted to a man clutching a deep wound in his shoulder, applied a tourniquet, and administered morphine. She glanced down the street. Enemy reinforcements were approaching. The squad was outnumbered, pinned down, and slowly being ground down. Claire understood then that their survival depended on her decisiveness. Firepower and medicine had to work in tandem. Hesitation meant death. She fired several controlled bursts, taking out a sniper on a rooftop. The rest of the insurgents hesitated, giving the squad a brief window to move some of the wounded into safer positions. Claire's arms ached, her lungs burned, and her vision blurred from dust and blood. But she pressed on. She dragged a soldier from the middle of the street, applied pressure to his chest wound, then turned to fire at an insurgent attempting to flank from the side alley. The enemy staggered under her precise shots, retreating momentarily. The squad was still alive. Her actions had bought them survival. Somewhere in the midst of it, she realized what had changed. No longer was she simply a healer. No longer was she the subject of jokes. She had become the force that held the squad together under fire. The medic had picked up a rifle and transformed into a protector, a warrior when circumstances demanded it. Hours or maybe minutes. Time had become meaningless past in a haze of smoke, shouting, and gunfire. Claire's body screamed for rest, but she continued, alternating between bandaging, administering morphine, and returning fire. She was everywhere at once, moving seamlessly between tasks, embodying a duality she had never been asked to master before. By the time the enemy finally withdrew, the streets were littered with debris and dust, the acrid scent of gunpowder thick in the air. Claire sank against the side of a Humvee, breathing hard. Blood streaked across her face and arms. The squad stared at her, wide-eyed, silent. No one made jokes. No one laughed. The medic they had mocked had become the savior they had relied upon. Claire's actions had not only preserved lives, they had rewritten expectations. As the convoy regrouped, the reality settled in. Several soldiers were wounded, but alive. Claire's hands were raw, her body exhausted, but her mind remained sharp, aware, calculating. She checked every soldier, reassured the injured, and prepared for the next movement. The ambush had not ended the mission, but it had defined her. For the first time, she truly understood the weight of her dual role. Medicine and combat were not mutually exclusive in war. Survival demanded both. The battlefield did not care about rules, regulations, or jokes. It only cared who lived, who adapted, who fought. Claire Donovan had adapted. She had fought. And she had saved lives. The squad now saw her differently. The laughter and ridicule of earlier days were gone, replaced by respect and awe. Claire didn't seek recognition. She only sought to do her duty. And in the crucible of Mosul's streets, she had proven that medics could fight and survive. The heat of the Iraqi sun pressed down relentlessly, but Claire Donovan barely noticed it anymore. Her uniform was streaked with dust, sweat, and dried blood. Her boots caked with grime. Her muscles ached from dragging the wounded. Her lungs burned from shallow, rapid breaths. And yet she moved like a force of nature, methodical, relentless, precise. The enemy had not given up. The momentary lull was gone. From every ruined Building, alleyway, and rooftop, insurgents re-emerged, their rifles spitting fire into the streets. Tracer rounds whistled overhead, embedding in walls, vehicles, and the ground around them. The squad was pinned down again, cornered in a stretch of road littered with debris. "Doc!" Sergeant Mills shouted over the chaos, pointing to Private Jenkins, who had been hit in the abdomen. Blood was soaking his uniform. Claire sprinted toward him, ignoring a hail of bullets that kicked up dust and debris around her. Her hands were steady despite exhaustion. She applied pressure to the wound, ripped open her aid bag, and pulled out a tourniquet and morphine. Her fingers worked almost automatically, wrapping, stabilizing, administering, all while maintaining situational awareness. As she worked, another insurgent advanced from a partially collapsed wall. Claire's heart raced, but she had no hesitation. She raised her rifle and fired in short bursts, hitting the target squarely. The insurgent dropped, and Claire immediately ducked back down to Jenkins, reapplying pressure to his wound. She had learned that in these moments, hesitation meant death. Her eyes darted constantly, scanning rooftops and windows, calculating threats, distances, and angles. Every move she made was deliberate, every breath measured. She alternated between combat and care seamlessly, a symphony of lethal precision and healing instinct. "Doc, we're getting overrun." A corporal yelled from behind a Humvee. Claire assessed the situation. 2 insurgents were advancing along the side street, another taking cover in the open intersection ahead. She calculated the timing, fired precise bursts, and kept the squad's attention focused. Each shot she fired was a calculated act of survival, each movement a life-saving maneuver. The wounded were piling up. Private Sanchez had a deep leg wound. His face was pale, eyes wide with fear. Claire knelt beside him, applying a tourniquet with one hand, while her other hand rested on the rifle, scanning the street for threats. She administered morphine, whispered words of reassurance, and braced him against the Humvee. From the corner of her eye, she saw an insurgent attempting to flank them from the roof of a half-collapsed building. Without hesitation, she aimed and fired, the recoil biting her shoulder, and the target slumped over the edge. Dust and smoke filled the air, stinging her eyes, but she ignored it, focused entirely on the wounded and the enemy. Every second counted. Every decision carried weight. Claire had become the squad's shield, a linchpin between survival and death. A mortar round exploded nearby, shaking the ground violently. Claire was thrown to the pavement, but rolled to her feet, ignoring the sting of shrapnel on her arms. She sprinted toward a soldier pinned under debris, pulling him free and checking his vitals. His chest rose and fell in shallow gasps as she applied a pressure bandage while keeping an eye on advancing enemies. The squad was fragmented. Some were firing suppressive rounds, others dragging the wounded. Claire moved fluidly between them, alternating roles as healer and fighter. The duality had become instinct, a rhythm in the chaos. Spot threat, neutralize threat, stabilize the wounded, repeat. She glanced up. Another insurgent appeared at the far end of the street, aiming directly at the Humvee behind her. Claire raised her rifle, fired, and dropped the attacker before he could take a shot. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed in a blur of smoke, dust, and gunfire. Claire's muscles screamed, her back burned from dragging wounded men, and her lungs gasped for oxygen. But she moved continuously, adrenaline overriding exhaustion. Every soldier she saved, every enemy she neutralized, reinforced her dual role. She was no longer just a medic. She was a protector, a warrior, a force that held the squad together. Private Jenkins groaned beside her, his hand clutching the bandage she had applied moments ago. "Doc, thanks," he whispered. Claire gave a quick nod, but didn't stop. There were others who needed her. She moved to Corporal Mills, who had taken a graze across his shoulder. She applied a dressing, keeping him stable while keeping an eye on advancing threats. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was razor-sharp. Each action was precise, each decision critical. The enemy regrouped, pressing harder now. Claire recognized the pattern. They were attempting to cut off the squad's retreat. She signaled to Mills, then directed soldiers to cover exposed flanks. She fired in controlled bursts, suppressing the insurgents while dragging a wounded private toward relative. Safety. The heat of the sun was relentless, the smoke thick and choking, but Claire pressed on. She moved like a force of nature, flowing between roles with fluid precision. She applied tourniquets, administered morphine, stabilized fractures, and returned. Fire all without pause. The squad's survival depended on her, and she refused to fail. One soldier, screaming in pain, had taken a severe chest wound. Claire sprinted toward him, ignoring bullets whipping past her. She pressed the dressing to his chest, administered morphine, and instructed another soldier to pull him behind cover. She was everywhere at once, firing at enemies, stabilizing the wounded, commanding the squad in moments of split-second decisions. Somewhere amidst the chaos, she realized the transformation was complete. No longer was she the medic dismissed, mocked, or underestimated. She had become a warrior. Her role had expanded beyond healing. She was a shield, a force multiplier, a guardian who could fight and heal simultaneously. The ambush began to wane as the insurgents retreated, their fire slowing. Claire leaned against a Humvee, breathing heavily, blood and dust streaking her face. The squad gathered around her, wounded but alive, some leaning on each other, some staring wide-eyed at the chaos they had survived. Sergeant Mills placed a hand on her shoulder. "Doc, I don't even have words," he said. You saved us all." Claire didn't respond. She checked the remaining soldiers, ensuring each one was stable, administering quick treatments where necessary. Praise was irrelevant. Survival mattered. Lives mattered. She looked down at her hands, shaking and bloodied. The pebble in her boot, the ridicule and dismissal of medics, was gone. She had crossed the line. She had fought. She had saved lives. The squad began to regroup, reposition, and move forward. The ambush had tested them to the limit. Claire moved from soldier to soldier, checking vitals, applying bandages, and stabilizing the wounded for transport. She had carried more weight than she thought possible, both physical and emotional, but she endured. Her mind was clear, though exhausted. She had faced death, chaos, and fear, and emerged alive, efficient, and decisive. The battlefield had recognized her, as had her squad. Medics didn't just heal anymore. They could fight, they could lead, they could survive. Claire Donovan had proven that fact in the crucible of Mosul's streets. And though the war was far from over, she had discovered something critical. Courage was not defined by role, rank, or expectation. It was defined by action, by instinct, by the willingness to step into danger and stand unwavering when others faltered. As the convoy resumed cautious movement, Claire kept an eye on every rooftop, every alley, every window. The insurgents might return, and she would be ready. Her rifle was at the ready, her aid bag at her side. She had become a force the squad could rely upon, a protector who could heal and fight in equal measure. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows over Mosul's streets. Dust swirled, mingling with smoke, blood, and sweat, creating a haze that mirrored the chaos of the past hours. Yet amidst it, Claire moved with purpose, every step deliberate, every decision life-saving. Her squad followed her lead, trust unspoken but absolute. She had earned it. The ambush was over for now, But the war continued. And Claire Donovan would continue to fight, heal, and survive, proving that medics could indeed fight, and when necessary, become the line between life and death. The late afternoon sun blazed over Mosul, casting jagged shadows across the debris-strewn streets. Dust hung in the air like a living shroud, and the stench of smoke, sweat, and blood was heavy enough to taste. Claire Donovan crouched behind a Humvee, rifle at the ready, eyes scanning rooftops and alleyways with laser focus. Her uniform was torn, her skin streaked with grime and dried blood, yet her movements were fluid, instinctive, precise. The enemy had regrouped. From multiple directions, insurgents re-emerged, their rifles blazing. Mortar fire cracked in the distance, sending vibrations through the ground, rattling Humvees and shaking loose dust from the crumbling walls. The squad had barely begun to catch their breath when the assault intensified. "Doc, over here!" shouted Sergeant Mills, dragging Private Sanchez behind cover. Sanchez had taken a grazing shot to the shoulder, blood seeping through his uniform. Claire sprinted across the open street, bullets kicking up dust around her. Her hands worked instinctively, applying pressure, wrapping tourniquets, and injecting morphine. Another insurgent emerged from a shattered doorway, aiming directly at them. Claire raised her rifle, firing quickly and precisely, hitting him squarely in the chest. He collapsed, but more emerged from a side alley. Bullets ripped through the air, ricocheting off walls and vehicles, sending debris in all directions. Claire didn't flinch. Her mind narrowed, honing in on her immediate objectives: protect the squad, stabilize the wounded, suppress enemy fire. She alternated between actions without hesitation, checking vitals, applying tourniquets, dragging soldiers behind cover, firing bursts of precise rounds at advancing enemies. Her body was screaming, her lungs burned, but adrenaline kept her moving with relentless precision. "Doc, over there!" "He's down!" a corporal yelled, pointing to a private who had been pinned in the middle of the street. Claire darted toward him, ignoring the hail of bullets whipping past her. She dragged him behind cover, applied pressure to his abdomen wound, and administered morphine, all while keeping one eye on advancing insurgents. The firefight was relentless. Dust and smoke reduced visibility to mere feet, yet Claire's instincts guided her. She spotted an insurgent attempting to climb a rooftop for a better angle. Without hesitation, she fired, dropping him instantly. Another emerged from a side alley, rifle leveled at her squad. Claire pivoted, firing controlled bursts. Forcing him back, every movement was calculated, every breath measured. The squad relied on her, though she never paused to acknowledge it. Each soldier's survival depended on her ability to act decisively and without hesitation. She moved fluidly between roles medic and combatant, her duality now fully realized. The battlefield demanded it. The war had no rules for who should fight and who should heal. It only demanded survival. A mortar round exploded nearby, sending debris and dust into the air. Claire was thrown against a Humvee, shrapnel tearing across her arm, but she ignored the pain. Her first priority was the wounded. She dragged Private Jenkins to cover, stabilized his leg wound, and reassured him in rapid, precise motions. Her gaze flicked to the enemy. Insurgents were converging from multiple angles, attempting to encircle the squad. Claire barked instructions, guiding soldiers to better cover positions. She fired suppressive rounds while simultaneously tending to wounds, a whirlwind of lethal precision and life-saving care. The duality of her role, both healer and fighter, had become instinctual. She moved with fluidity and grace through chaos, a linchpin between life and death. Minutes stretched like hours. Every second was a test of endurance, every action a battle of survival. Claire's arms burned from dragging wounded soldiers, her hands raw from bandages and shrapnel, her lungs gasped for air. Yet she pressed on, ignoring exhaustion, fear, and pain. She spotted a soldier pinned in the open, rifle aimed at the insurgents. Claire fired at the attackers, suppressing their advance, then sprinted to drag him behind cover. Blood soaked his uniform, but he was alive. She applied a tourniquet, administered morphine, and signaled for another soldier to cover him. The squad's survival depended on her. They no longer doubted her abilities. The laughter and dismissal of earlier days were gone, replaced by unspoken trust and reliance. Another wave of insurgents emerged, firing from rooftops, alleyways, and behind vehicles. Claire's pulse surged, but her hands were steady. She aimed at a sniper perched on a crumbling balcony, fired, and watched as he fell. Another insurgent tried to flank from the left. She pivoted, firing precise rounds that forced him back into cover. Amid the chaos, she saw a private clutching a chest wound, blood soaking his uniform. Claire sprinted to him, applied a dressing, administered morphine, and reassured him with a calm voice. Her duality, combatant and healer, had become seamless, instinctual, and terrifyingly effective. She realized then that she had become something her squad had never expected. No longer just a medic, she was a protector, a warrior, a force capable of defending and preserving life simultaneously. The ambush reached its peak intensity. Mortar fire exploded, bullets whizzed past, and dust filled the streets. Claire moved like a whirlwind, dragging wounded soldiers behind cover, stabilizing their injuries, and suppressing enemy fire with precision. She coordinated the squad, issuing rapid-fire instructions, adjusting positions, and ensuring that every soldier had cover. Her body was screaming. Pain radiated through her arms, legs, and back. Yet she pressed on, fueled by adrenaline, determination, and the unwavering need to keep her squad alive. Every round fired, every bandage applied, every decision made was a battle in itself. Claire had become the heart of the squad, the linchpin holding them together amidst chaos, smoke, and blood. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed in a blur of motion, gunfire, and shouting. Claire's mind operated on instinct, her actions fluid and deliberate. She moved between roles, healing, firing, guiding, and protecting. Every soldier she saved, every enemy she neutralized, reinforced her dual mastery. Private Sanchez groaned beside her, clutching a severe leg wound. Claire applied a tourniquet, administered morphine, and reassured him with a quiet, steady voice. Another soldier, pinned behind debris, received her attention immediately afterward. She dragged him to safety, stabilized his chest wound, and signaled for covering fire. The squad was alive because of her. Finally, the enemy began to withdraw, their coordinated assault faltering under the squad's tenacity and Claire's lethal efficiency. The streets fell silent, except for groans of the wounded and the distant hum of engines. Claire sank against a Humvee, exhausted, bloodied, and shaking. Around her, the squad stared wide-eyed, awed, and silent. No one made jokes, no one laughed. The medic they had dismissed had become the force that had preserved their lives. Sergeant Mills placed a hand on her shoulder, voice rough with emotion. "Doc, you saved us all. I don't know how to." Claire shook her head, checking the remaining soldiers for injuries. Praise was irrelevant. Survival mattered. Lives mattered. She glanced at her hands, streaked with blood and grime. The ridicule of earlier days, mockery, dismissal, doubt was gone. She had crossed the line. She had fought. She had saved lives. As the convoy regrouped and began cautious movement through the streets, Claire kept her rifle ready, eyes scanning every rooftop and alley. The enemy might return, but she would be ready. Her dual mastery of medicine and combat had been tested and proven. The sun began to dip, casting long shadows across Mosul's streets. Dust swirled, mingling with smoke and sweat, forming a haze that mirrored the chaos of the past hours. Claire moved with purpose, every step deliberate, every action life-saving. The squad followed her lead, trusting her implicitly. She had earned it. The ambush had been survived, but the war was far from over. And Claire Donovan had learned the critical truth. Courage, skill, and determination could transcend expectations, rewrite roles, and define survival. Medics could fight, they could lead, and they could save lives in ways no one imagined. Claire had become that person. The late afternoon light bled over Mosul, turning dust and rubble into a haze of gold and gray. Claire Donovan crouched behind the last Humvee in the convoy, rifle gripped tightly, eyes darting from shattered windows to crumbling rooftops. Every alley, every corner, every broken wall seemed alive with danger. The squad was battered, exhausted, and low on ammunition. Yet the enemy had not relented. They had regrouped for one final devastating assault. "Doc, over here," Sergeant Mills shouted, dragging Private Jenkins behind cover. Jenkins had a deep wound in his abdomen, blood pooling around him. Claire sprinted, ignoring bullets whipping past, and dove beside him. Her hands moved with precision, applying pressure, wrapping a tourniquet, and injecting morphine while scanning for advancing threats. A mortar round exploded nearby, shaking the pavement violently. Dust and debris filled the air, choking lungs and blinding eyes. Claire rolled behind the Humvee, her body trembling, but her focus razor-sharp. The squad depended on her, and she could not falter. Another insurgent emerged from the shattered doorway across the street, rifle leveled directly at her squad. Claire fired, dropping him instantly, then pivoted to another who had moved along the crumbling wall to flank them. Her shots were precise, deadly, each one buying her soldiers precious seconds to move or take cover. Amid the chaos, Claire's hands never stopped. She applied pressure to chest wounds, administered morphine, wrapped bandages on arms shredded by shrapnel, and checked vitals, all while firing at approaching insurgents. Her dual-role medic and fighter had become instinctual. Every action was a calculated blend of life-saving care and survival-driven aggression. Corporal Sanchez screamed from behind cover, blood running down his leg from a grazing wound. Claire lunged to him, applying a tourniquet and pulling him to a safer position. Another insurgent appeared on a nearby rooftop. Claire pivoted, raised her rifle, and fired, watching as the man crumpled over the edge. The squad was alive because she had become the linchpin holding them together. The enemy intensified their assault. Snipers fired from rooftops, and insurgents emerged from alleys and ruined buildings, converging on the squad's position. Claire's pulse surged, but her hands remained steady. She fired bursts of suppressive fire, while simultaneously moving from wounded soldier to wounded soldier, stabilizing them and giving instructions to ensure cover. Private Jenkins groaned beside her, clutching his abdomen. Claire applied additional pressure and reassured him in a steady voice. "Stay with M. Jenkins. You're going to be fine." Her words were both command and comfort, a testament to her dual role as both healer and protector. Another insurgent appeared, sprinting across the open street to cut off retreat. Claire's rifle cracked sharply. The man dropped, but more were advancing. She pivoted, firing in controlled bursts, buying the squad precious seconds to reposition. Each second counted. Every shot mattered. Every decision carried the weight of life and death. The squad was fragmented, pinned between advancing insurgents and deadly sniper fire. Claire assessed their position, calculating angles, threats, and escape routes. She barked orders, signaling to soldiers to cover exposed flanks while she suppressed enemy fire from a partially collapsed building. Her voice carried authority, calm yet commanding, cutting through chaos. A mortar landed just yards from their position, throwing dust and debris into the air. Claire was knocked to the pavement, but rolled immediately to her feet, scanning for threats. She spotted Private Sanchez, pinned under rubble with a deep leg wound. Claire sprinted to him, cleared debris, applied a tourniquet, and administered morphine. Her hands were raw, muscles screaming, yet she refused to stop. The squad's survival depended on her. The enemy's assault grew more desperate. Mortar rounds exploded, bullets whizzed past, and dust clouds obscured vision. Claire moved like a whirlwind, dragging soldiers behind cover, stabilizing injuries, and firing with deadly precision. Her body was a conduit of lethal force and life-saving care. Each action she took was decisive, a delicate balance between combat and medicine. Private Jenkins' breathing was shallow, his blood staining the dusty pavement. Claire leaned over him, checking vitals and adjusting the tourniquet. She administered another dose of morphine, whispering, "You're going to make it. Stay with me." Her hands moved with practiced precision, her eyes never leaving the approaching threats. Another insurgent attempted to flank from the left. Claire pivoted, firing in controlled bursts that forced him back into cover. She moved fluidly between roles, her dual mastery complete. She healed, protected, and fought with equal efficiency. Minutes or hours passed in a blur of action. Claire's body ached, her muscles burned, her lungs screamed for air. Yet she pressed on, moving between wounded soldiers, checking vitals, stabilizing wounds, and suppressing enemy fire. Her rifle was an extension of her body, her aid bag a lifeline. Every action was deliberate, every decision calculated. The squad was alive because of her. They moved cautiously, following her lead, trusting her instincts and guidance. She had become their anchor amidst chaos, a force capable of bridging life and death in a single heartbeat. "Doc, how are you doing this?" whispered Corporal Mills, wide-eyed, blood streaking his uniform. Claire didn't pause to answer. Survival mattered, not words. She returned fire at an advancing insurgent, then rushed to a private clutching a chest wound, stabilizing him with calm precision. The battlefield demanded action, not explanations. The final assault was the most dangerous yet. Insurgents had coordinated their attack, pressing from multiple angles, using every ruin, alley, and rooftop to gain advantage. Claire assessed, calculated, and acted. She coordinated the squad, giving orders for cover fire while moving between wounded soldiers, stabilizing them, and returning fire with lethal accuracy. Mortar rounds exploded, sending shards of concrete into the air. Bullets ricocheted off walls and Humvees. Claire's uniform was tattered, her body bruised and bleeding, yet she pressed on. Every soldier she saved, every enemy she neutralized, bought them seconds to survive. She spotted a sniper climbing a broken wall. Without hesitation, she raised her rifle, aimed, and fired. The enemy slumped over. Another insurgent tried to flank from a side alley. Claire pivoted and dispatched him with controlled precision. Finally, the enemy began to withdraw, their assault faltering under the squad's resilience and Claire's decisive actions. The streets fell silent except for groans of the wounded, the distant hum of engines, and the soft clatter of spent ammunition hitting the pavement. Claire sank against a Humvee, exhausted, bloodied, shaking, yet alive. Around her, the squad gathered, wounded but alive. Wide-eyed, silent, awestruck, they stared at her. No one laughed. No one mocked. The medic they had dismissed had become the shield that had preserved their lives. Sergeant Mills placed a hand on her shoulder, voice rough with emotion. "Doc, you saved us all." I don't know how to." Claire shook her head, checking the remaining soldiers for injuries. Praise was irrelevant. Survival mattered. Lives mattered. She glanced at her hands, streaked with blood and grime. The ridicule of earlier days was gone. She had crossed the line. She had fought. She had saved lives. As the convoy regrouped and moved cautiously through the streets, Claire kept her rifle ready, eyes scanning every alley and rooftop. She had become the squad's linchpin, their protector, their healer, and their warrior. The sun dipped, casting long shadows across Mosul's streets. Dust swirled in golden haze, mirroring the chaos that had passed. Claire moved with purpose. Every step deliberate, every action life-saving. The squad followed her lead, trusting her implicitly. She had earned it. The ambush was over, for now. But the war was far from finished. And Claire Donovan had discovered the critical truth. Courage, skill, and determination could transcend expectations, rewrite roles, and define survival. Medics could fight. They could lead. They could save lives in ways no one imagined. Claire had become that person. The streets of Mosul were eerily quiet now, the echoes of gunfire replaced by the groans of the wounded, the distant hum of engines, and the occasional crackle of radio communication. Dust and smoke hung in the air like a lingering ghost, mingling with the metallic scent of blood and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Claire Donovan leaned against the rear Humvee, exhausted, bloodied, and shaking, yet alive. Her body screamed with fatigue, her muscles burned, and every joint ached from hours of relentless action. The squad gathered around her, wide-eyed and silent, taking stock of the battlefield. They were battered, wounded, and exhausted, but alive. Every man and woman in her unit owed their survival to Claire's decisive actions. She had been the linchpin, the shield that had protected them through the most intense ambush of their deployment. "Doc, I don't even know what to say," Sergeant Mills said, voice rough, eyes wet with emotion. You saved us all." "I don't know how we—" Claire shook her head, cutting him off gently. "Don't. We survived because we stayed together, because we did what we had to do. That's all that matters." Her voice was calm, but underneath it, exhaustion and relief wrestled for dominance. She moved from soldier to soldier, checking vitals, applying final bandages, and ensuring that everyone was stable enough to move. Private Sanchez's leg wound was wrapped and stabilized, though he still leaned heavily on a Humvee for support. Private Jenkins' abdomen wound had been reinforced with extra pressure and morphine, and his breathing was more even. Corporal Nill's shoulder wound was bandaged, and the squad's morale, though shaken, had begun to recover. Claire surveyed the street. The rubble-strewn avenue was a testament to the chaos that had unfolded. Mortar craters, shattered Humvees, debris, and dust littered the battlefield. Bodies of insurgents were scattered across rooftops and alleys, neutralized through her precise fire and the squad's combined efforts. For all its destruction, life had prevailed, and Claire had been the key. Her hands shook as she wiped sweat and blood from her brow. The weight of what she had done, what she had become, pressed down like an invisible force. For years, she had been the medic who was laughed at, the one told she couldn't fight. And yet, here she was, rifle in hand, a protector, a warrior, a healer, the person who had kept her squad alive under impossible circumstances. The irony was not lost on her. The same colleagues who had once doubted her skills now looked at her with awe and respect. Private Jenkins, pale and weak from his injuries, managed a small smile. You were amazing, Doc," he whispered. Claire offered a tired nod. "We all did what we had to do." "You made it through," because you fought too. The squad began moving cautiously down the street, each step deliberate. Claire stayed at the center, rifle slung but ready, scanning every alley and rooftop for lingering threats. The ambush had been intense, but the danger was not entirely gone. Mosul was a city of shadows, and insurgents could return at any moment, yet the squad's trust in her was absolute. She led them, alternating between medic and warrior, healer and protector, guiding them safely through the remnants of the battlefield. Every action was deliberate, every movement precise. The duality she had mastered during the ambush now defined her. As they reached a relatively safer stretch, Claire paused, leaning against the Humvee, catching her breath. Sergeant Mills approached, hand on her shoulder. You changed everything today, Doc. I don't think I've ever seen anyone handle a situation like that. You didn't just save lives, you led us. You're remarkable. Claire shook her head, still catching her breath. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because someone had to. We survived because we worked together, because I refused to let anyone fall. That's all that matters. The squad lingered around her, some sitting, some leaning against. Vehicles still processing what had just happened. The adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion and the weight of trauma in its place. Claire looked at each of them, making silent notes of who needed attention first, who needed reassurance, who simply needed water. Her medic instincts remained sharp, even in exhaustion. The sun began to dip behind the shattered skyline, casting long, jagged shadows across the street. Dust swirled around them, illuminated in the fading light, as if the battlefield itself was exhaling, acknowledging the end of the ambush. Claire knelt beside Private Sanchez, checking his bandage one last time, pressing gently to ensure it held. You're going to make it, she said softly. We all are. We stick together. Her voice was steady, confident, a calm in the eye of the storm she had lived through for hours. She moved to the center of the squad, raising her gaze too. The skyline. The city was scarred, chaotic, and dangerous, but they had survived. She had survived. The soldiers began to speak softly among themselves, recounting moments where Claire had saved them, moments where her precision and calm under fire had meant the difference between life and death. The laughter that had once greeted her as just a medic had vanished completely. Respect and gratitude replaced mockery, and for the first time, Claire felt that her skills, both medical and combat, were recognized, valued, and essential. Corporal Mills approached, voice quiet but firm. Doc, you're more than just a medic now. You're a warrior, a protector. You've earned every ounce of our trust. Claire nodded, allowing herself a small, tired smile. She had crossed a line she had never imagined, and yet it felt inevitable. Survival demanded it. The battlefield had demanded it. She had answered. As night fell over Mosul, the squad began to move toward extraction points, every step cautious, every glance alert. Claire remained at the center, vigilant, providing medical guidance while maintaining readiness for combat. Her dual role, once questioned, now proven, was absolute. She was a healer and a fighter, and her squad relied on her completely. The aftermath of the ambush was devastating, but they were alive. The wounded were stabilized, the squad intact, and the enemy had been repelled. Claire's actions had not just saved lives, they had defined the outcome of the battle. Exhaustion finally caught up to her as they reached a secure area. Claire sank to the ground, leaning against the Humvee, closing her eyes for a brief moment. The adrenaline faded, leaving a deep ache in her muscles and bones. Her hands were trembling, her lungs still burning, but relief and satisfaction filled. Her mind, they had survived. They had made it through impossible odds. She opened her eyes and looked at the squad. Some were seated, tending to minor wounds. Some were silent, reflecting on the chaos they had endured. All of them looked at her with quiet awe, the same people who had once doubted her skills now seeing her as indispensable, heroic, and unshakable. Claire thought back to the first day she had arrived in Mosul, to the whispers and laughter of those who thought medics don't fight. She smiled faintly, bloodied and exhausted, knowing how wrong they had been. She had fought, she had healed, she had led, she had survived, and she had redefined what it meant to be a medic in combat. Sergeant Mills crouched beside her. "Doc, no one's going to doubt you again. Today, you proved that medics can fight, that they can lead, and that they can save lives in ways no one expected. You're incredible." Claire's voice was quiet yet resolute. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it was necessary. That's all. We survived because we stuck together. That's what matters." The squad began to settle into the temporary safe zone. Claire moved among them, checking final bandages, offering water, and providing reassurance. Her body ached, but her mind remained alert. The war was far from over, but the ambush had proven something undeniable. Courage and capability could transcend expectations, rewrite roles, and define survival. Medics could fight. They could lead. They could save lives in ways no one imagined. Claire Donovan had become that person. The battlefield had forged her into something new. A healer, a warrior, a protector, and a leader. She had earned her place not through rank, not through authority, but through action, courage, and unwavering commitment to those who depended on her. As night fully descended over Mosul, Claire leaned back, rifle still within reach, eyes scanning. The horizon, the ambush was over, the squad was alive, and for the first time, she felt that every ounce of training, every moment of doubt, every challenge she had faced had led to this moment. She had survived, they had survived, and she had proven the truth that would never be forgotten.